It happened on a late spring evening. The kind that tricks you into thinking the world is healing, while inside, you're still broken. I remember the scent of pine and wet earth in the air, the kind that only comes after a week of rain. I was sitting by the window in silence, chewing on a piece of dry bread, when I heard it. A knock. Not on the door. More like something brushing against the wood. Scratchy, uneven, hesitant. I stood still. For a few seconds, I thought maybe it was the wind, or a branch. But then it came again, closer, slower, like someone dragging their fingers along the boards. I took the shotgun from the wall. Not because I'm some macho type or a hunter. I hate guns. But I've lived here long enough to know what desperation can do. People stray into these woods. Sometimes they don't leave alone. When I opened the door, the last thing I expected to see was a she-wolf. She stood there, half collapsed, soaked in mud and blood. Her sides heaved like she'd run for miles. Her fur clumped in places where skin showed through. And in her jaws, gently as if carrying a newborn, was a tiny gray cub. I didn't move. She didn't growl, didn't flinch. She looked up at me with eyes that should have been wild, dangerous. But they were hollow, tired, wet. And I swear to you, they were pleading. I lowered the shotgun. We stood there in silence. The cub made a small, choked noise. Something between a whimper and a gasp. That's when I noticed his belly wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe something deeper I didn't want to name. I knelt slowly. She didn't stop me. She laid the cub down at my feet and backed away one step. Her whole body trembled. I picked him up. He was limp, cold, but not stiff. There was still a chance. I turned and walked inside. She followed. I didn't invite her, but I didn't shut the door. Inside, the place was barely lit. I grabbed the lantern from the shelf, lit it with a match, and placed the cub gently on the worn table. His fur was damp, sticky with something darker than mud. I wrapped him in an old shirt and ran to the stove. The fire was still warm. I threw in 2 logs and pumped the bellows until flames licked the iron. Behind me, she whined. Not loud, just once. Enough to let me know she was still there. I pulled out the old first aid box. Not that I had much, some gauze, alcohol, gloves, scissors. No antibiotics. No IVs. Nothing meant for wolves. I cleaned the wound on his side. Looked like he'd been bitten. Maybe by a predator. Or maybe, God forbid, by another wolf. He flinched. That tiny movement made something in me crack. He was alive. I pressed a warm cloth to his chest. Rubbed it gently. Try not to think about the fact I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't a vet. I wasn't even a good neighbor. I was just a man who'd run away from the world. But that night, for some reason, I couldn't let this one go. I worked for what felt like hours. Heating towels, cleaning wounds, whispering things I didn't even remember saying. The she-wolf never moved far. She sat in the corner, near the doorway, eyes locked on her cub. If I got too rough, she'd growl low, not in warning, but in worry. At one point, I looked at her and said softly, "I'm trying. That's all I've got." She blinked, as if she understood. At some point past midnight, the cub's breathing steadied. Shallow but steady. I laid him in a padded wooden box lined with towels, placed near the stove. I turned to the she-wolf. She didn't look at me. Her gaze stayed on the box. I brought out a bowl of water and set it nearby. Then I backed off, sat on the floor, my back to the wall. We stayed like that for a long time. The storm had passed. The moon filtered through the broken blinds. And in that strange, sacred silence, something shifted inside me. I didn't know what, just that I wasn't alone anymore. But then, just as I was about to close my eyes, something made the hairs on my neck rise. Through the window, in the dark line of trees at the edge of my yard, I saw a movement. A figure, not an animal, not a shadow. Someone was watching us. The fire was burning low when I finally dozed off in the chair. I must have only slept for a few minutes. My neck ached. My eyes stung. The smell of blood and smoke still clung to the room. I looked over. The cub was still in the box, breathing. Barely, but breathing. The she-wolf hadn't moved. Her gaze hadn't left him. I whispered, more to myself than to her, "Still here. That's something." She blinked once. Her ears twitched. The lantern light danced on the walls, casting warped shadows. My cabin had never felt this small, this fragile. Like it was holding its breath too. I got up, bones stiff, and brought over a pot of warm water. Tore a clean piece of cloth from an old flannel shirt. Dipped it. wiped the cub's side gently, careful not to press too hard. His fur had matted around the wound. It looked worse in the light. The bite mark had deep punctures. Infection was a real risk. I wished I had better supplies. I reached for the box I hadn't touched in years. Metal clasps rusted shut. Inside were some of my old tools, wrapped in dusty rags. Carving knives, files, a small hammer. Back when I still had hands that made things. Before the crash. Before everything. I shook my head. Not now. No time to drown in the past. I used the thin blade to carefully cut away the fur around the wound. Cleaned it again with alcohol. The cub flinched, but didn't wake. "Hang in there, little guy," I muttered. In the corner, the she-wolf stood up. Took one step closer. Just one. Then lay down, keeping her eyes locked on the box. For a moment, I saw something in her. Not wildness. Not fear. Just a mother. Exhausted. Clinging to whatever was left. I moved to the workbench by the back wall. Pulled out a plank of soft pine I'd kept for no reason. Measured a small arc with a piece of string and started carving. I wasn't sure what I was building, but I needed to do something with my hands. They still remembered, even if I didn't. The sound of blade against wood was a comfort. Familiar. Real. As I worked, memories came without warning. The crib I built for Emily. The way she smiled when she saw it, running her hands along the smooth edge. The way our daughter kicked inside her belly, like she was already testing it. It had been raining that day too. I pushed the thought away. No use reopening scars. After an hour, I'd made a small half-dome brace, padded with linen, to cradle the cub's body, to keep pressure off the wound. I lifted him gently and placed him inside. The she-wolf shifted closer, just a step, and let out a soft whine. "He's okay," I said. "Or he might be." I placed the box back near the stove. The heat wasn't too strong, just enough to keep him warm. I laid out a bowl of water and an open can of tuna. Not ideal, but it's what I had. The she-wolf sniffed it, then ignored the food. Her eyes stayed on the cub. I didn't ask questions anymore. I just sat there, between them, breathing, listening to the wood pop in the fire. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to check the shed. Something had been bothering me since earlier. That shape in the woods. The way it stood too still. I grabbed a flashlight, kept the shotgun slung over my shoulder, and stepped outside. The wind had picked up. The trees whispered things I didn't want to hear. I circled the shed. Found nothing at first. Then I saw it. Tracks in the mud. Not animal. Boots. Deep treads. Recent. Someone had been here. I followed the trail a few feet. It stopped near the edge of the tree line, then vanished. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, every sense alert. But the forest gave nothing back. When I came inside, the she-wolf was gone. The door was slightly ajar. The bowl was untouched. The cub was still breathing. I looked out the window, scanned the trees, called out softly. Nothing. She had vanished into the night like smoke. I sat down on the floor, leaning against the cold wall. The box with the cub glowed softly in the firelight. I whispered, "She'll be back." Right. But the silence didn't answer. Just the wind. I waited all morning. Kept checking the window, listening for movement, for breath, for anything. But the she-wolf didn't come back. The cub was still alive, but only barely. His breathing had become steadier through the night, like the rhythm of a fragile clock. I checked the bandages, cleaned around the wound again, and whispered encouragements he couldn't understand. "Hang in there, little guy. Your mom's coming back. She has to." But noon came. Then 2. Then 4. And still, nothing. A deep, gnawing worry started to grow in my gut. Wolves don't just leave their young. Not unless something forces them to. I stood by the door, hand resting on the knob for a long time. Then I made up my mind. I left the cub wrapped in towels near the stove, locked the door behind me, took my flashlight, a knife, and the old bolt-action rifle I hadn't used since the accident. I didn't want to use it, but I knew better than to step into these woods unarmed. The forest was damp and heavy with silence. Birds weren't singing. That unsettled me more than anything. I followed the muddy trail she must have taken. There were paw prints pressed into the soil, clear at first, then more erratic. I kept walking. The ground sloped upward. Pines gave way to dense underbrush. My boots squelched with every step. Half an hour in, I found the first sign. A patch of fur caught on a broken branch. Black, matted with blood. My stomach dropped. Further up the hill, claw marks dug deep into a tree trunk. Long frenzied, like something, or someone, had chased her. Or she had tried to fight. Not long after that, I found the trap. Old, Rusted, but still deadly. It had been sprung recently. Blood stained the teeth. A smear of it led off into the brush. I followed. The trail led me to a small clearing. Quiet. Still. The kind of stillness that feels wrong. There, under a fallen log, I saw a movement. Not the she-wolf. Two tiny shapes. Wolves. Cubs. Curled into each other. Thin, shaking, covered in leaves and dirt. One looked up at me, eyes glazed, but alive. I dropped to my knees. My hands trembled. They didn't move. Too weak to run. Too scared to cry. I didn't think. I wrapped them both in my coat, held them close to my chest. They were light as air, just bones and fur. I looked around, called out, "Hey, anyone out there?" Silence. No answer. No howl. No sign of the mother. I had a choice to make. Leave them. Go looking for her. Risk getting lost, or worse. Or get them out now. I took one last scan of the area. Nothing moved. The air was still, and the sky had started to dim. I turned back. The walk home felt longer. My shoulders ached. My legs burned. But I didn't stop. When I finally reached the cabin, the first cub was still asleep. His breathing had improved. His little body no longer trembled with every breath. I placed the new cubs beside him, layering towels and soft rags between them. Then I collapsed on the floor. My hands were dirty. My knees scraped. But I couldn't stop staring at them. 3 of them. Alive. And no mother in sight. I whispered. I thought I was saving one. Just one. Outside. The wind howled through the trees like a distant voice. A warning. Or a cry. I stood and locked every door, every window. Something was wrong in those woods. More than just traps. More than hunters. I didn't know what yet. But I could feel it. And whatever it wasn't finished. Morning came cold. The fire had gone out. I didn't sleep. I just lay on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the breathing of 3 cubs, soft, fragile, full of fight. They were still alive. Somehow, I fed them water through a soaked rag, one by one. Mixed a bit of canned broth in with warm milk I'd picked up a week ago from the gas station down the mountain. They were too weak to resist, too weak to understand. But they drank. The first cub, hers, was stronger than before. His wound wasn't oozing anymore. He lifted his head once, looked around, then let it fall back onto the towel. A win. It was quiet outside. Too quiet. Around mid-morning, I stepped onto the porch with a pair of binoculars. Scanned the tree line. Something had shifted. The woods weren't right. Still no birdsong. No rustling. Just tension. Then I saw it. 2 men. Far off, but clear enough. Moving slow, like they were searching. One of them carried a rifle. The other had something slung over his shoulder. Could have been a trap or a bag. Maybe worse. They weren't hikers. No orange vests. No dogs. They were too quiet. Too purposeful. My heart started pounding. I backed into the house, locked the door, shut the curtains. This wasn't about wolves anymore. I pulled out the map I kept folded in the back of the pantry. Spread it across the table. Marked where I found the cubs. Where the trap had been. Drew a rough triangle around the area. If those men were circling, they'd be here soon. I had to think. I grabbed tools. Wood, nails, a rusty saw. Worked in short bursts, checking the windows between hammer strikes. I built a false wall in the back closet, just big enough to hide the cubs. Layered it with insulation and towels to keep them warm. Then I dug out a camo tarp from the shed and covered the front windows. From the outside, the place now looked abandoned. I even scattered ash near the chimney to make it seem like no fire had been lit in days. By late afternoon, the wind picked up again. The forest whispered. I went out back to chop wood, trying to act normal. That's when I heard twigs snap behind the chicken coop. I turned slowly. Didn't speak. Just listened. Footsteps. Crunching leaves. Someone was there. I moved fast, pretended I didn't hear. Walked inside. Left the door cracked. I waited. A shadow moved near the edge of the yard. A tall man, maybe late 40s. Camouflage jacket. Rifle slung low. He stopped at the tree line, scanned the house, then turned and walked along the edge, disappearing behind the shed. I grabbed the rifle. Not to shoot. Just in case. But he didn't come closer. Eventually, I heard an engine start somewhere down the road. A truck, maybe. Then silence. Still, I didn't breathe easy. That night, I didn't light the lantern. Used only the stove for heat and a candle behind the false wall. The cubs whimpered now and then, but didn't cry. They were huddled together in the dark, eyes barely open. I sat by the back window, watching, waiting. Then, just before midnight, I saw a movement in the woods. But it wasn't a man. It was her. She crawled, dragging one leg. Her fur was darker now, matted, soaked. She limped badly. Her head hung low. But it was her. I ran outside. She didn't flinch, just collapsed near the woodpile. I dropped to my knees. Her hind leg was twisted, clamped in rusted steel. A trap, still attached. Jesus. I pulled out my knife. Worked fast. She growled once, weakly, but didn't bite. Didn't even lift her head. It took minutes to cut the trap spring. Blood coated my hands. Her breath was shallow. Her side heaved. I looked into her eyes. You made it back, I said. You came back. She blinked. That was all. I lifted her carefully. Her body was lighter than it should have been. Bones under fur. Inside, I placed her beside the cubs. She didn't move, just looked at them. And for the first time, they stirred. Crawled toward her. One let out the faintest cry. She closed her eyes. I sat on the floor again, back to the wall. Rifle across my lap. There were more traps out there. More men. And if they were hunting her, they'd come back. But now, they'd have to go through me. By morning, the she-wolf still hadn't moved. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes barely open. I checked the wound. The leg was swollen, raw, angry. I cleaned it the best I could the night before, but infection was setting in fast. I crushed aspirin into powder and mixed it with water, dropped it onto her tongue using a spoon. She gagged once, then swallowed. The cubs stayed close to her, quiet and still. They seemed to know. I fed them as usual, then packed a small bag. Water, first aid, flashlight, cans. I couldn't stay here anymore. Not with those men circling. I had to move them somewhere deeper. Somewhere I'd camped before years ago. It was a place maybe 2 miles up the ridge, past an old deer trail. No road, no tracks. Hidden. She couldn't walk. I knew that, but I wasn't going to leave her. I built a sling from canvas and rope. Tested it with firewood first. Then, just before noon, I lifted her gently into it and strapped her to my back. She didn't resist, didn't growl, just laid her head down and closed her eyes. I carried the cubs in a crate tied to the front of my chest, wrapped in cloth. One whimpered once. The rest of the journey was silent. It took me 3 hours. Branches scraped my face. My legs burned. My back ached so bad I saw white spots. But I didn't stop. Not once. When we reached the hollow, it looked just like I remembered. A small clearing behind a rock outcrop, with a natural overhang and soft moss all around. I laid her down carefully, tucked her in with towels and pine boughs, made a small fire with dry twigs, and built a lean-to from branches. That night, I stayed awake, listening for footsteps, engines, anything. But the forest stayed quiet. Over the next 2 days, her breathing improved. I fed her broth and bits of meat with a spoon. She began to lick her cubs, nudged them with her nose. She knew me now, not just as a helper, but as something else. I didn't know what. I spoke to her often, not to be heard, just to feel human again. You know, I said once, I used to think I didn't belong anywhere. After the crash, I mean. I lost them. My wife, my baby girl. And I kept asking why. Why me? Why them? She watched me. Her eyes didn't blink. But now I wonder if I was kept around for this. To be here. To meet you. She rested her head. On the 4th day, I heard footsteps. Not animals. Heavy. Deliberate. Breaking twigs, not dodging them. I grabbed the rifle and stepped into the shadows, crouched low, every nerve burning. A man stepped into the clearing. One of the same two. I recognized his jacket. He had a pistol. Looked around slowly. He muttered. Knew I saw a movement here. He stepped closer, toward the lean-to. I didn't move. My finger hovered over the trigger. Then, without warning, a shape burst from the side. It was her. She didn't bark, didn't growl, just launched herself, teeth bared. She hit him in the side. He fell, cried out. Fired once. Missed. I ran forward, kicked the gun from his hand, held the rifle to his chest. He froze. His eyes darted between me and the wolf. I said nothing, just stared. He raised his hands. I'm not. I was just. Go, I said. Don't come back. Ever. He nodded quickly, scrambled to his feet, and ran. Blood dripped from his arm. She'd bitten him good. I turned to her. She was panting, bleeding again from the leg, but alive. That night, I kept the fire burning bright. A week later, we returned to the cabin. Just me and the wolves. I fixed the roof. rebuilt the back door, made new shelves. They stayed with me another month. She healed slowly. The cubs grew, began to wrestle, yelp, chase shadows. And then one morning, I woke up and they were gone. No blood, no tracks, just gone, like they had never been there. I walked to the clearing behind the house, sat on the stump I'd carved years ago, and there she was, standing at the edge of the trees. All four of them. She looked at me, just looked, and then turned, walked into the woods. I didn't follow. I went inside, sat at my table, pulled out a yellowed notepad, and wrote a letter. Emily, today, I saw a wolf walk away. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I think I'm ready to come back now. Not to the city, but to life. I folded the page, placed it in the drawer, and just sat there, smiling.